Policy of January 6, 2015, the gentlewoman from Ohio, Mrs. Beatty, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members be given 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and add any extraneous materials relevant to the subject matter of the discussion.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise this evening along with my co-anchor of the Congressional Black Caucus's Special Order Hour with my classmate and my colleague, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries from the 8th District of New York. It is an honor for me to stand here and be a co-anchor with him. Tonight's topic, Mr. Speaker, is the Congressional Black Caucus's Special Order Hour entitled Unfinished Business. Congressional Black Caucus, to our Republican leadership, do your job. As the Congressional Black Caucus comes to the House floor this evening as voices to be heard on unfinished congressional businesses, let me pause for a moment first to pay respect to Gwen Ifill, who passed earlier today. Ms. Ifill, an award-winning television journalist for NBC and PBS, helped pave the way for both women and men and African Americans in the field of journalism. Her voice will be missed. Her voice is a voice that we listen to as members of the Congressional Black Caucus. Mr. Speaker, today the House of Representatives returned for the first day of the lame duck session of the 114th Congress. As the conscience of the caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus is committed to advocating for a change to policies that adversely impact African American communities. Yet, Mr. Speaker, over the past 2 years, the 140th Congress has been highly unproductive, passing one partisan bill after another, which then languishes with no chance of being passed by the Senate or being signed into law by President Obama. In fact, as of November the 2nd of this year, only 244 bills have been signed into law, and only 20 of those bills have been significant pieces of legislation. The American people really deserve more from their elected representatives. But the 114th Congress is not over, and we should use the remaining time wisely. The list of legislative items that this House should consider before going home for the year is robust. Legislation to fully fund the government's fiscal year 2017, for one. The American people deserve a fully funded government that invests resources in people, reduces poverty, and safeguards the social safety net programs. We're currently operating under a continuing resolution, Mr. Speaker, as you know, through December the 9th. And while the current funding mechanism has been keeping the federal government doors open, it fails to fully recognize the importance of investment in programs which would benefit not just a few, but all Americans. In addition to the omnibus, we should bring to the floor legislation providing reform for criminal justice reform, voting rights, gun violence prevention, just to name a few. You're going to hear from several members of the Congressional Black Caucus who have spent an inordinate amount of time crafting legislation, sitting in their committees, going back home to their district, making promises that the American people are asking for. Mr. Speaker, we have the opportunity starting today to use the last few weeks of the 114th Congress in a productive way to stand up for the constituents and to pass bipartisan legislation. Mr. Speaker, how many times have we been in this chamber and someone in that chair has said, we are going to work together or for the good of the country or our constituents? That's what our constituents expect us to do. So let me just briefly take a moment to remind you, Mr. Speaker, why it is so important that we have a fully funded federal government and provide funding for critical programs. Critical programs like those that address ethnic and racial health disparities by improving diversity in healthcare workforce and increasing the number of health professions in underserved communities, for example. Mr. Speaker, we have my colleague and friend who has served as our Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust Chair, Congresswoman Robin Kelly, who is with us today and has fought tirelessly for health care. You're going to hear from her tonight. It is well known that poverty and social economic status and health disparities are closely linked and latched together. Many of these gaps are shaped by generations of cultural biases, injustices, and inequality. And in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health care is the most shocking and inhumane. Mr. Speaker, for years, I have had the honor of serving on the American Heart Association board, where researchers have shared the alarming statistics as how African Americans are 30% more likely to die of heart disease and 60% more likely to be diabetic than white Americans. The cost of these types of health disparities are simply too high. Estimates indicate that health disparities cost our nation as much as $300 billion a year, which results in too many Americans suffering unnecessarily because they do not have access to the care they need. Statistics such as these illustrates the increased need to address health care disparities by continued investment in federal programs such as the Office of Minority Health at the Department of Health and Human Services and the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities at NIH. We cannot shortchange these important federal programs by putting them in neutral or on pause, Mr. Speaker. We must enact a fully funded omnibus spending bill for the fiscal year 2017 before leaving Washington. A real simple request of doing your job. This has to stop, Mr. Speaker. I am privileged to be joined this evening by so many members of the Congressional Black Caucus. I'm joined by my co-anchor, as I mentioned, and you will hear from him shortly. But at this time, it gives me great pleasure to have the privilege of asking to be able to yield to Congressman G.K. Butterfield. He is the Congressional Black Caucus Chair from the 1st District of North Carolina. Someone whose history and past and leadership in fighting for justice and against disparities is far too long for me to appropriately say tonight. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I'll yield to Congressman G.K. Butterfield.
Let me begin, Ms. Beatty, by thanking you so very much for yielding time tonight, and thank you for your friendship, and most of all, thank you for your extraordinary leadership here in the Congress. I've been observing your work since the first day that you came to this House, and I can tell my colleagues that she has worked relentlessly on behalf of the people of the 3rd Congressional District of Ohio, and thank you for anchoring this special order hour tonight. Mr. Speaker, before I get into the other part of my remarks tonight, I just want to digress for a moment and to recognize a great American that we lost today. I recognize the life and legacy of a dear friend a friend of the Congressional Black Caucus, a personal friend of mine, Gwen Ifill. She was one of the nation's leading journalists, regarded as one of the most prominent African-American journalists in the country, and indeed a prominent journalist among all journalists. Ms. Ifill began her career in the 1970s, during a time when there were very few African Americans, very few females in journalism. Gwen was a trailblazer in her profession. She was a best-selling author and moderator of 2 vice presidential debates. Gwen Ifill was among the nation's finest political correspondents, as she was gracious and poised when addressing some of the most pressing issues facing our country. Her voice will be missed in the media, but her legacy will continue to have a lasting impact on how we view news broadcast. We offer our sincere condolences to Ms. Ifill's family, her friends, her followers, and colleagues all around the world. Mr. Speaker, we are at a crossroads right now in our great country. That is undisputable. But I want my colleagues to know that the Congressional Black Caucus is up for the challenge. The CBC is poised in the 115th Congress to have a record number of 49 members of Congress. Currently, we have 46. The number will go to 49. The CBC vows to continue to be the voice of our communities, representing more than 30 million Americans. We will continue to have conversations in all of our communities, and we will zealously represent our constituents. We will stand strong as a caucus. We will stand strong against any Republican effort to reverse the progress that we have made over the past few decades. We are facing some tough times ahead, Mr. Speaker, but we're going to continue to be clear on our priorities. We're going to continue to talk emphatically about promoting economic growth that will create jobs and stability in our communities. We're going to continue to talk about the critical need for criminal justice reform. We will continue to debate and talk about and to legislate on creating educational opportunities and reducing student debt. And don't you think that we've forgotten about the Voting Rights Act. We will continue fighting for the full restoration of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, this was the first election that we've had without the protection of the full protection, at least, of the 1965 Voting Rights Act since it was implemented. Finally, we are going to continue to ensure diversity in the corporate arena, in the workforce, and even in classrooms. Mr. Speaker, there are peaceful protests taking place in many communities across America. As I drove into Washington, D.C. this afternoon, I even saw some here in Washington. We understand the protests. We understand the pain. We understand the pain in all of our communities due to the negativity and the division that they have seen over the last 12 months. And so we say to House Republicans that our communities are reeling with discontent, and you need to understand this discontent. Now is the time to take up legislation that will help to lift those around the country that need us desperately to act. We have unfinished business presently before this Congress. Let us act and let us move legislation that will help those that need our voices the most. Mr. Speaker, we have the capacity to do this. Congresses in past years have worked in a bipartisan manner, and they have succeeded. And we can do the same. We must work together as Democrats and Republicans on behalf of the American people. Compromise, Mr. Speaker, is not a bad word. Again, Ms. Beatty, I want to thank you for yielding time. At this time, I am completed my remarks, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman G.K. Butterfield. Thank you not only for your words, but for your leadership as our chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. I now yield to Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Another member of the Congressional Black Caucus who stands strong and sure-footed with us as we talk about our unfinished business. A member who has no problems coming to the mic and sharing her intellect and giving us a direction of where we should go. It is indeed my honor to yield to Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, a leader in the criminal justice reform wheel space, the judiciary areas, and she is from Texas's 18th congressional district.
Let me thank the gentlelady from Ohio, one, for her leadership and dynamic message she gave this morning when we were discussing in the district and the area of our colleague Congressman Hank Johnson and John Lewis, the issue of economic empowerment and economic empowerment as it relates to women, and particularly women of color. Let me thank the gentlelady for that, and as well for leading today, along with Mr. Hakeem Jeffries of New York, this very important special order of unfinished business. Let me say that all of us, and you will hear certainly this repetitive refrain, have been challenged in this last election. Now, let me be very clear for those of our colleagues who may be listening or those who may be hearing. I am by no means whining. What I do speak to, of course, however, is and will be over a period of time whether or not there were fractures in the democratic process that were driven not by candidates, for candidates can say and do as much as you may be offended by them saying or doing, but whether or not there were actually systems that undermine the voting process. Starting first, of course, with the Supreme Court's extinguishing of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act and the long, how should I say it, journey of members of the Congressional Black Caucus and the Democratic Caucus and others of goodwill to restore Section 5, or in essence, a fix to Section 5, and the long period of time that we had, Congressman Beatty, to fix it, but it never got fixed before the election, which means that there are a number of jurisdictions that faced a high mountain of trying to be able to vote. People were purged off of lists in a number of states. Individuals, unfortunately, had challenges with respect to what local officials may have been doing. And we will get all of this out in the wash, but we would have been much better off if we had the Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. In my own jurisdiction, even though it ultimately was fixed under the auspices of they were not ADA compliant, we consolidated and closed a lot of precincts that we had to correct, because on Election Day, people would be going to their home precincts and they didn't exist. So clearly, fixing Section 5, fixing the Voting Rights Act, is not unfinished business. It is a requirement. It is adamantly necessary to do. Let me quickly say that we only did one out of the 12 appropriations bills. So agriculture is not done, commerce, justice is not done, defense, energy and water, financial services. All of these impact the lives of Americans. We are still in the dilemma of the Flint water crisis. We've gone to Flint. We, as members of the Congressional Black Caucus, have spoken to those people who are hurting. They have various ailments, one woman with a rash, hair loss, children with cognitive issues, and we have still not resolved that. Protecting children with disabilities, access to public education. My state alone has been an embarrassment, for they were only providing for 7 to 8% of children with disabilities, based as opposed to the national average of 13 to 14%. We need to make sure that we ensure that those children are protected under federal law. My state says they're immediately stopping the capping, but I'd prefer that we have it institutionalized in law and to make sure it works. Immigration reform. We have to worry about the DACA young people who are working in our economy, and now with the potential that they may be on the deportation list. Funding for the Louisiana flooding is crucial. crucial whether those dollars have gotten after our colleague, Congressman Richmond, worked so hard, told us of the trillions of dollars of flooding that occurred in his constituency. They need help, and we must get them help. Funding for the damage caused by Hurricane Matthew, that is, of course, in North Carolina, Princeville, areas that I remember going to. Our own colleague, the Honorable G.K. Butterfield, our great chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, and nonetheless, improving cybersecurity of the nation's critical infrastructure. I finish on this point, and that is on criminal justice, which I know a number of members will speak of. As a ranking member of the Criminal Justice Committee, I want to thank all the many members who've offered legislation and thank the members on the Judiciary Committee, particularly under the leadership of John Conyers, and certainly those who work with the chairman. But we must pass police reform and accountability, the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Bill. We must pass sentencing reduction bill that will codify some of the work that needs to be done, prison reform that will turn prisons into true institutions of rehabilitation, and also a new matrix in juvenile justice to stop punishing our young people, but to provide a corrective, rehabilitative approach, which is my juvenile justice block grant accountability bill, or the reauthorization of the juvenile block grant legislation, along with anti-bullying and bullying intervention. We must do these things because the American people have sent us here to do our job. We must do these things because they're right. We must do these things because the American people need this legislation. We must simply do these things because, Mr. Speaker, we must do our job. I thank the gentlelady, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. It is now my honor to yield to Congressman Greg Meeks from New York's 5th Congressional District. There are so many things that I could say about him. I am honored that I serve with him on the Financial Services Committee. I am honored that he is a soldier in the battle. When I think of some of the words that President Barack Obama said, it reminds me of Congressman Meeks when President Obama said justice is not only the absence of oppression, it is the presence of opportunity. I yield to Congressman Greg Meeks.
Thank you. You know, the Congressional Black Caucus is often called the conscience of the Congress. The conscience of the Congress. We don't say we're just the conscience of black people. We don't say we're just the conscience of some people. We say that we are the conscience of the entire Congress because we want to work to help all of Americans, particularly the least of these. Many of us run around and we talk about our various religious beliefs, and no matter what your religious belief is, it teaches us that we need to take care of those who do not have. So we are here in what we call the People's House, and one of the things that we should make sure that happens with the People's House taking the lead is that we end poverty. Poverty does not discriminate. Poverty does not look at which section of the country you're in, what religion you have. You can find poverty in rural America and urban America. And so we should be here to do our jobs to help all Americans. When in fact you have individuals who are still drinking bottled water, we need to pass a water resources bill, not only for a small section of individuals, but for everyone. Because when we look at what's taking place now, we see and we are finding, even we found right here in the United States Capitol, a problem with water. And water equals life. And everybody's life is important. And why we've got to pass this budget is so that we can make sure that everybody has certainty that they receive the items that they need. What are the most basic needs of any human being? You cannot live without health care. So we've got to continue to make sure that we're providing for health care. I know some are talking about eliminating Obamacare, but 20 million Americans who did not have any health care at all, now for the first time in their lives have the same or have access to health care. We cannot end that. Education. We know today that education is more important than ever before. We must pass this budget that has education at its core to make sure that every American has the chance to live up to her or his dreams. Criminal justice reform. We've got to make sure it's fair and equitable for everyone. You know, when you think about this budget, stability is important. The government relies on stability. We must fund the government so that we don't have short-term uncertainty. We've got to take care of our military. We've got to take care of emergencies like storms, like hit my district. We're still recovering from Sandy. So there must be stability in the budget and not these short-term things that we continue to do so our country can move and prosper. So let's stay and do the job that the American people has elected us to do. Let us understand, even though this election, that there has to be, as Chairman Butterfield said, compromise, because the majority of the American people voted one way. The Electoral College had another decision, which means that we've got to all work together to move this country forward. And we can do that, and we will be stronger doing that together. So I want to thank Congresswoman Beatty for engineering this evening, because we must speak with our voices loud, and I know the members of the Congressional Black Caucus will talk loudly and clearly to make sure that we represent the people that vote for us every 2 years. But we know that we are the conscience of the Congress, that we have a responsibility to the American people. And I say to my Republican friends, you too have a responsibility, and that responsibility is to come budget so that we can keep this government moving and keep it stable moving forward. And we can do that because this Congress is stronger if we work together.
Thank you so much, Congressman Greg Meeks, for lending your voice to tonight's special order hour. It is indeed my honor now to yield to Congressman Hank Johnson from Atlanta, Georgia. And as you heard earlier, I had the opportunity to spend my morning with Congressman Hank Johnson and to listen to him talk about access to capital, talking about African American women and their roles in business and in leadership. It is my honor to yield to him. Mr. Speaker, I'll enter his testimony into the records if that's appropriate, and I'd like to yield now to my colleague, Congressman Donald Payne.
That will be covered under general leave.
Okay. Thank you. It is my honor to ask Congressman Donald Payne from New Jersey to come and lend his voice tonight. He is someone who brings a message to us. He's someone who advocates for our financial needs. He advocates for our children. He is a father. He is a husband. And he is someone that understands in the time that we are having now the value of quality education, the value of removing our children from poverty, because he understands all lives matter.
Mr. Speaker, let me first thank the gentlelady from Ohio for this opportunity to speak this special order hour, and also to my other classmate, the Honorable Hakeem Jeffries from New York, for this opportunity to speak at this time on unfinished business. Mr. Speaker, it has been my great honor to represent the 10th Congressional District of the state of New Jersey for the past 2 Congresses, and have seen a great deal of angst, seen some accomplishment, but not as much as the American people are due. We come here week after week, get here on Monday nights, like tonight, come in, meet with our staffs, and then are told the proposed votes that we have that evening. And most nights, it's 2. Now, I understand it is a night of travel and making sure all members have the opportunity to get here. But what does it say about Tuesday, when there could possibly be 2? Or Wednesday morning, when there will only be 2 votes? There's unfinished business, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, in the House of Representatives. So many issues that we could discuss, and I think they're all being hit by my colleagues. Zika is a frightening prospect for this nation moving forward. And yet and still, we're unable to get the level of funding that the President has asked for to try to understand and stop this disease, do the research needed to figure out what is going on or how to prevent it. But we just go home for recess. Not until it enters the continental United States or certain member states will they take it seriously. The whole issue around gun control, common sense gun legislation, unfinished business. As my colleague, Mr. Meeks, spoke about the issue around water, the most basic necessity of life. We traveled to Flint as a Congressional Black Caucus along with Leader Pelosi and Mr. Hoyer. And we talked to that community about what they were going through, how they didn't know who to trust anymore because their elected officials had misled them to believe that something with a brown discoloring was drinkable. Well, we found out, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, that it was not drinkable. In fact, it was poisonous. How do we do that to American citizens? We're given the obligation to stand in the gap for them, to make sure that we take care of them at every turn. But yet and still, because it was cheaper to use another water source, it was done to these people. And so I traveled back to my district in Newark, New Jersey, and I talked to several mayors in my district. And I said, you know what I saw in Flint? You need to pay attention to what's going on with your water source. And that was on a Friday evening. By Tuesday of that morning, Mr. Speaker, they had found lead in 88 schools in Newark, New Jersey. And so they had to switch over to bottled water. And the testing continued, and more schools were involved. I created legislation for testing for lead in school systems around the country because it is not legislated anywhere in the country to test for lead in school systems. So I moved forward on that legislation. You wouldn't know it because the majority wouldn't allow it to hit the floor. And so here we are, going back to our offices in the Cannon office building, frustrated with this issue, knowing that it is just going to continue to grow. And lo and behold, 5 months after my legislation is suggested, we find there's lead in the water in the Cannon office building, where the members of Congress's offices are. So now there's bottled water and water fountains have been sealed off. This is something that we need to understand, needs to be addressed, unfinished business. And I could just go on and on and on. But I just want to let you know, Mr. Speaker, that we will continue to raise these issues for as long as it takes. We are part of this body. We're not going anywhere. Our voices will be heard on the unfinished business of this House. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you so much to my classmate and colleague from New Jersey's 10th Congressional District. Mr. Speaker, at this time, it is indeed my honor to yield to Congresswoman Robin Kelly from the 2nd District of Illinois. We've heard that common creed that says, I am my brother's keeper. Well, she is my sister's keeper. When I think about her work, I am always so happy because I admire her. I remember the day that she sat down when we stood up. She reminds me of what Rosa Parks did in 1955 when she decided if she sat down, it would start a movement. Well, Robin Kelly sat down on the House floor because she said we should do more than just stand up when someone lost their life to gun violence. So it is indeed a great honor for me to yield to Congresswoman Robin Kelly.
Thank you, Congressman Beatty, and thank you, Congressman Jeffries, because you have held it down for a long time now and made us proud to be members of the Congressional Black Caucus because of how you've presented yourself with the special order hours and how you've taken on the responsibility. So I just wanted to thank both of you so very much. When I think about unfinished business, you know where I'm going. I think about the gun violence that is still occurring where I represent in the Chicagoland area. We are up to 618 deaths and 3,273 shootings. Now, I don't know about today because it's occurring every day. And I know it's not just about the legislation, but we do need background checks. We do need national straw purchasing bills and bills that pass. We need gun trafficking bills, but we also need to improve, as you've heard, police-community relations, but we also need to invest in people. We need to invest in underserved communities. We need to make sure that people have decent housing, decent education, that they get the job skills they need so that they can have jobs. There are too many still unemployed, and that's why a lot of the violence occurs. We need more mentors. But I have a bill, like my past colleague just said, the Urban Progress Bill. The bill was presented but never went anywhere, just like the background check bill. There are, bipartisan bill, 190 co-sponsors, but the bill never gets called to the floor. We have spent time, I believe 68 times, trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act, but we've never sat down to see what are the problems, where do you think it should be improved. No, we just tried to repeal everything, and there's great things about that bill. There are so many more people covered that would not have been covered. I am the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust, and African Americans die from 8 out of the top 10 diseases, and that's because of lack of access to places. But the Affordable Care Act has definitely helped in that arena, but we need to do more. We need to send funding to NIH. We need to, and we can do more. We are the wealthiest country in the world, yet we have the amount of homelessness we have, the amount of violence we have a lack of affordable college education. Our students are suffering. They cannot live the American dream because we are not doing the right thing in Congress. So much unfinished business. We talk about people pulling themselves up by the bootstrap, but they have to have the strap on the boot to be able to pull themselves up. But it seems like we don't have the American heart. We don't have the caring. Immigration, there was a bill we could have passed in the House, but we just don't call the bills to the floor. We're just really ignoring so many things, and I don't see how we could feel proud when we go back to our districts because there's so many things that we haven't done. And I hope in this, as we call it, the lame duck session, is not too late. We can call some of these bills to the floor. We can save lives by calling bills to the floor. In Flint, they can drink clean, quality water if we do what we're supposed to do. We cannot sit and rest on our laurels. And when we go into 2017, if we want cooperation and we want the spirit of unity, we need to see that cooperation and unity now, not just in 2017. So I'll yield back my time. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and let's do our job.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Robin Kelly. Mr. Speaker, I now yield to Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman from New Jersey's 12th District. I am so honored to serve with her. She stands in the same space as the Special Order Hour Chair for our Progressive Caucus. Earlier today, I benefited from her wisdom as she said to me, I'm used to being in charge, and I like being in charge. So I'm going to stay tonight and lend my voice to the Special Order Hour on our unfinished business. I yield to Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much, Congresswoman Beatty. It's indeed an honor to be here and standing with you and with Congressman Jeffries as you bring forth truth to power here in what you speak of. It is definitely a timely topic to be discussing unfinished business, what we can do. People need to realize that we have but 15 legislative days left in this congressional session. And so there are so many things that need to be done that haven't been appropriately addressed. I want to associate myself with the comments that were made by those who came before me as it relates to gun safety. I want to remind us that back in 2012, in Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, someone went in there and killed 20 children and 6 adults and killed himself. But since that time, there have been at least 1,100, close to 1,200 mass shootings, at least 1,300 deaths, and at least 4,700 that have been wounded. And that's just since November the 6th. There are so many common sense gun safety bills that are just waiting to be voted on. And I know that if given the opportunity, the majority in this House would vote appropriately and properly, taking into consideration the safety and security they represent to our communities. But there are other things that we need to be thinking about. We need to ensure that we are protecting the environment, that we're protecting protecting the environment against unnecessary fracking and unnecessary pipelines. We need to make sure that we're reforming criminal justice, that we're educating, not incarcerating, that we're putting our resources where we get the best value. We need to increase the minimum wage so that people can have a livable wage, raise their families, take care of their homes, and ensure that they have a little bit of money to spend so that they can churn up this economy. And we need to restore the Voting Rights Act. We need to ensure that voting is accessible, that people have the opportunity and the encouragement to vote when they are supposed to and when they could. And finally, one last thought for me. We need to look at the kinds of protections that we've had in our banking system, protect just everyday families with their investments. We need to make sure that we are investing in the 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act. Those are the things that the people, everyday working families, look for us to do our work, and together we can do those things and make it better for each and every one of us. Thank you, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman. Mr. Speaker, it is indeed my honor to yield to my co-anchor, my classmate, my friend, the congressman from the 8th Congressional District of New York. I wanted to pause for a moment and think about what I would say as he will come as the co-anchor. An individual who serves in this Congress, one of Congress's best orators. When I think about him, I thought I would introduce him this way, Mr. Speaker. He is brave and brilliant. He is strong and strategic. He is always prepared and persistent. I now yield to my co-anchor, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries.
Well, thank you. I want to thank my distinguished colleague and good friend from the 3rd Congressional District, the always elegant and eloquent and effervescent and erudite anchor of the CBC special order, who has made us all proud in the manner in which she has conducted herself on behalf of the people that she represents, as well as the entire Congressional Black Caucus and, of course, the class of 2012. Once again, it's my honor and my privilege to stand on the House floor and participate in the Congressional Black Caucus's Special Order Hour, where for 60 minutes we have an opportunity to speak directly to the American people about issues of great significance. And I can think of no more profound moment by which we need to address the people throughout this country who we are privileged to represent than in the aftermath of the most recent election. I think it's important first to reflect upon the fact that in this country we already have made significant progress over the last 8 years. A lot of folks, some of my friends on the other side of the aisle, they don't want to acknowledge that fact. The reality of the situation quantitatively is very different. Under 8 years of George W. Bush, this country lost 650,000 jobs. In almost 8 years of Barack Obama, we've gained more than 15 million private sector jobs. 79 consecutive months of private sector job creation. The deficit has been reduced by more than $1 trillion under the presidency of Barack Obama. When he came into office, the unemployment rate was at 10%. Now it's at 5%. When Barack Obama took office, the stock market was at 6,000. Now it's over 18,000. More than 20 million Americans who were previously uninsured now have health coverage, and more than 300 million Americans don't have to worry about being denied health coverage because of a pre-existing condition, all as a result of the presidency of Barack Obama. I could go on, but America is a better place today because of the 44th President of the United States of America. But of course, now we find ourselves in a situation where we have to continue to address the issues of great importance to the American people. In this democratic republic, time marches on. And as Abraham Lincoln once referenced, we're in a constant march toward a more perfect union. And so the question, of course, is, well, what are some of the issues where we can find common ground here today? In the aftermath of one of the most divisive elections in our nation's history, let me suggest that there are a few CBC priorities where some of my good friends on the other side of the aisle seemingly should take interest in addressing. The first thing, of course, relates to poverty. And despite what we've heard from the president-elect throughout the campaign, poverty is not simply an inner-city problem. My colleague Joyce Beatty is a testament to the fact that so many folks who live in great cities like Columbus, incredibly professional, built wonderful lives, pursued the American dream. Poverty is not an inner-city problem, it's an American problem. In fact, the majority of persistently poor counties in this country, parenthetically, that's defined as counties where 20% or more of the population has lived below the poverty line for 30 or more years. The majority of persistently poor counties in this country are represented by House Republicans. I don't know if the president-elect realizes that. And so poverty and making sure that every single person in America has an opportunity to pursue the American dream isn't a Democratic issue or a CBC issue. It's an American issue. Maybe we can figure out a way collectively to deal with this problem, because it doesn't just impact the people I represent back home in Brooklyn. The second issue that I think we can find common ground on, hopefully, is criminal justice reform. The House Judiciary Committee has already passed bipartisan legislation unanimously to deal with our unjust sentencing laws, as well as to make sure that everyone has an opportunity for a second chance in life once they've paid their debt to society. And there's been great cooperation from many of my friends on the other side of the aisle. Leaders on criminal justice reform, people like Jason Chaffetz and Trey Gowdy and Raul Labrador. People where there may be issues that we don't have a lot in common, but who recognize, along with a whole host of other folks, that we have an overcriminalization problem in America when we have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's incarcerated individuals. We incarcerate more people in this country than any other country in the world. And if you take China and Russia's population combined, it's in excess of 1 billion individuals, yet we incarcerate more than those two countries put together. And I would say to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I think that dealing with mass incarceration in America fits squarely within your philosophical approach to a whole bunch of things. I'm not asking you to become a progressive Democrat. Fiscal conservatives should object to the fact that we spend $80 billion plus a year wasting economic resources and opportunity and human capital, as states in places like Texas and Kentucky and Georgia and Louisiana have done. Not blue states like New York or California, red states who recognize that the fiscally conservative thing to do without sacrificing public safety is to deal with overcriminalization in America. I would also suggest that many of my friends, Christian conservatives, I'm a conservative, I guess, in the sense that I'm a proud member of the Cornerstone Baptist Church, but I don't know what the distinction is, but Christian conservatives, I guess, is the lingo and the language that is often used. All of us who believe in some form of religion, particularly those, of course, who define themselves as Christian conservatives, should embrace the notion that you should have a second chance in life, because theologically, underpinning your religious beliefs is the notion of redemption, that we're all sinners in the eyes of God, with the exception of one person who has walked this earth. And once you pay your debt to society, you shouldn't have a permanent scarlet letter that prohibits you from being able to experience the American dream. And so I think criminal justice reform fits squarely within the philosophy of my fiscal conservative friends, my Christian conservative friends. I would also suggest that my libertarian friends, as Rand Paul and Raul Labrador have illustrated, should also object to the mass incarceration problem that we've got in America. I understand you don't like over-taxation. We can argue about what's the appropriate rate. I understand you don't like over-regulation. This is all about government overreach. You should have a problem with over-criminalization, because there's no area where the government can do more damage than when they have the ability to take away your life or your liberty. And so we stand here as members of the CBC talking about unfinished business, not urging you to cross over and adopt our philosophy, adopt your philosophy and apply it to criminal justice reform. And then the last issue I would suggest as we talk about unfinished business is the notion of the Voting Rights Act having been decimated. And I'm disappointed that so many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle think that this should be a partisan issue and that there's a Republican advantage. Let's be honest. And that's why we don't want to do anything to fix it. Because when you look at the proud history of the Voting Rights Act, it's always been bipartisan in nature. It would not have passed this Congress without support from moderate Republicans in the House and in the Senate. That's a fact. There were members of the Democratic Party, so-called Dixiecrats, that opposed it with everything they had. And it would not be law today without Republicans. And every time the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized, it was signed back into law by a Republican president. 1970, Richard Nixon. 1975, Gerald Ford. 1982, Ronald Reagan. 2006, George W. Bush. We're not asking you on the House floor to act like progressive Democrats. Just act like Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush, who recognized that voting rights is not a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. It's an American issue. And so with that, I would just conclude by saying this. It would be a mistake for my friends on the other side of the aisle to interpret too much from this election. I'm trying to figure out what exactly is the mandate when it appears that more than 2 million Americans will have supported, in terms of the popular vote margin, the candidate who lost. And it was a mistake when others interpreted too much from an electoral college victory. Hubert Humphrey lost the popular vote, won the popular vote in 1968. The Electoral College sent us Richard Nixon, and we got Watergate. And Al Gore won the popular vote in 2000. And I think there was too much of a mandate interpretation. We got 2 failed wars and the worst economy since the Great Depression. So the question is, you're going to learn from recent history? Or you're just going to celebrate this unexpected victory where you lost the popular vote? I would suggest, let's just find common ground. maybe on some of the areas that we've laid out here today. But we're not asking you to change your philosophy, change your ideology. But in areas like poverty, where you've got just as much at stake based on your constituents as we do, or criminal justice reform, where your philosophy is consistent with dealing with mass incarceration and overcriminalization in America, or the Voting Rights Act, which has a proud bipartisan history. Let's start there and then see what we can do as it relates to addressing the business of the American people as we go in to the next Congress, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congressman Jeffries. Mr. Speaker, let me just end this with these words. This may be my last time as the lead anchor, so I cannot leave this chamber without saying thank you. Thank you to President Barack Obama for giving us 8 years of changing this country. Thank you to President Barack Obama, whose legacy 10 or 20 years from now will go down in history as one of our greatest presidents for making change. And let me now say, Mr. Speaker, thank you, Congressman Jeffries, for reminding me of where we are now. If we really are going to finish our unfinished business, President-elect, who said, as I paraphrase, gangs roaming the streets, African-American communities being decimated by crime. You walk down the streets and you get shot. Well, Mr. Speaker, we could take care of that in the 114th if we really believe that. We could do a crime bill. We could do a voters' rights bill. We could do 10, 20, 30. And Mr. Speaker, as my time comes to an end, let me say that I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record statements from Congresswoman Terry Sewell and Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson. I yield back.
Without objection, that will be covered